Late in the Cretaceous period, when dinosaurs still ruled the land, another world existed beneath the surface of the sea. It was a world crowded with predators. Sharks moved through the open water, giant fish hunted the depths, plesiosaurs cruised above the sea floor, ammonites drifted through the currents. Sea turtles, diving birds, and marine reptiles filled nearly every level of the food chain. Nothing in this ocean had an easy life. And yet, into that world came a predator that would rise into the highest ranks of them all. Mosasaurus. Not a dinosaur. Not a crocodile. Not a fish. A marine reptile more closely related to modern lizards and snakes than to Tyrannosaurus rex, breathing air while spending its life in the open ocean. Some members of its family grew to lengths approaching a modern bus. Fossils preserve evidence of violent feeding, shattered shells, swallowed prey, and injuries carried by animals that lived in a sea where almost everything had teeth. The remarkable thing is that Mosasaurus did not evolve in the ocean. Its ancestors belonged to a lineage tied to the land. Yet within a relatively short span of geological time, that lineage transformed into one of the most successful groups of marine predators the planet has ever seen. And it all happened near the end of the age of dinosaurs, in the final chapter of a world that was already approaching one of the greatest extinction events in Earth's history. How does a lizard lineage become one of the dominant predators of the sea? What kind of ocean allows something like Mosasaurus to exist? What did it hunt? What could threaten it? And why did a predator this successful disappear completely? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most dangerous oceans Earth has ever produced, and the reptile that rose to the top of it. But before we begin, I'm curious, is this your first time here, or have you been down this rabbit hole with us before? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's head back to the late Cretaceous and meet the sea that made Mosasaurus possible. The name arrived long before most people understood the animal itself. Embedded in stone from the region surrounding the Meuse River, fragments of an ancient predator slowly emerged from sediments that had rested undisturbed for millions of years. From that river came the name Mosasaurus, meaning Meuse lizard, a title that carried a clue hidden in plain sight. Despite its immense size and fearsome reputation, this creature belonged to a lineage far closer to lizards and snakes than to the giant dinosaurs that usually dominate visions of the prehistoric world. Mosasaurus was a genus of mosasaurid marine reptile, one member of a larger family that flourished during the late Cretaceous. It spent its life in the ocean, hunted other animals for food, and occupied the role of a large predator in marine ecosystems. Yet the familiar labels often attached to prehistoric creatures can sometimes obscure more than they reveal. Mosasaurus was not a dinosaur. It was not a whale, despite living entirely within the sea. It was not a crocodile drifting beneath the surface of ancient coastlines. Nor was it a fish, even though its body had become remarkably adapted to life in open water. Its place on the reptilian family tree lay among the squamates, the broad group that today includes lizards and snakes. That ancestry gives Mosasaurus a particularly fascinating position in the history of life. While dinosaurs walked across continents and pterosaurs crossed ancient skies, the ancestors of Mosasaurs followed a different evolutionary path. Their story remained tied to the reptilian branch that would eventually produce many of the scaled animals still living today. Seen through that lens, Mosasaurus becomes less like a marine dinosaur and more like a giant ocean-going relative of creatures that now bask on rocks, disappear into deserts, or slide through grass. Its existence was also confined to a surprisingly narrow chapter of Earth's history. Mosasaurs flourished during the late Cretaceous, a period when sea levels stood high and shallow oceans spread across vast regions of the planet. Mosasaurus itself is especially associated with the Maastrichtian, the final stage of the Cretaceous period. It lived during the closing moments of the age of dinosaurs, inhabiting seas that existed only a geological instant before one of the most significant extinction events in Earth's history transformed the world. Popular culture has often stretched the image of Mosasaurus beyond the boundaries supported by evidence, turning it into a creature of almost limitless proportions. Fossils tell a more measured story. Large individuals were certainly impressive animals, but modern estimates are generally more cautious than some earlier reconstructions. Depending on the specimen and the methods used, large Mosasaurus individuals are often estimated at roughly 11 to 13 meters in length. Such dimensions remain extraordinary without requiring exaggeration. A predator of that size moving through a Cretaceous sea needed no embellishment to command attention. In that sense, the word monster functions less as a scientific category and more as a human reaction to scale. The science describes a giant predatory marine reptile, one shaped by evolution into a highly successful hunter. The emotional weight of the title comes from imagining such an animal moving through ancient water, sharing its world with sharks, marine reptiles, immense fish, and countless other forms of life. Yet even that description remains incomplete because no predator exists apart from its surroundings. The identity of Mosasaurus was shaped as much by the ocean around it as by the bones within its body. And understanding the animal means understanding the remarkable sea that allowed it to exist at all. A map of the late Cretaceous would feel strangely unfamiliar beneath modern eyes. Coastlines wandered far from their present positions. Shallow waters stretched across immense distances, and places that now lie beneath wheat fields, grasslands, and rolling plains rested under sunlit seas. The world was experiencing one of the great marine expansions in Earth's history, shaped by high sea levels that allowed ocean water to spill across continental interiors and create vast aquatic landscapes unlike anything seen today. Among the most remarkable of these was the Western Interior Seaway, a broad inland sea that divided North America into separate land masses for millions of years. It formed a watery corridor running across the continent, linking northern and southern marine regions through a continuous passage. Regions now associated with dry horizons and open prairie existed beneath waves instead. Portions of what would eventually become the Great Plains rested beneath marine sediments, accumulating layer upon layer of evidence from a vanished world whose shoreline shifted gradually across the ages. This sea was not remarkable simply because of its size. Its true significance lay in what it could support. Warm waters spread across extensive shallow shelves, where sunlight reached deep enough to sustain extraordinary biological productivity. Countless microscopic organisms drifted through the upper layers, forming the foundation of an immense living network. Invisible to any passing predator, these tiny producers captured energy that would travel upward through the ecosystem in countless directions. Small fish fed upon that abundance. Larger fish hunted the smaller ones. Schools moved through the water like living currents, gathering and dispersing across changing conditions. Sharks cruised through the same environments, following opportunities wherever they appeared. Ammonites drifted and swam through the sea in great variety, their coiled shells becoming part of the ecological fabric that supported larger hunters. Above the surface, diving birds crossed between water and air, drawing nourishment from the marine world below. Beneath them moved marine reptiles of many forms, each occupying its own place within the layered structure of the ecosystem. The National Park Service describes mosasaurs as apex predators of the Western Interior Seaway, and notes that regions now associated with the Badlands once rested beneath these warm marine waters. Yet apex predators are only possible because an enormous amount of life exists beneath them. The largest hunters are supported by long chains of energy transfer, each level depending upon the one below. Plankton supports small prey support larger prey. Larger prey sustain the animals capable of occupying the highest positions in the food web. The great predators of the late Cretaceous were therefore not isolated marvels, but visible expressions of an entire system working beneath them. Seen from within, the sea was a world of overlapping layers rather than empty distance. Near the surface, light filtered through moving water, illuminating fish and drifting organisms. Farther down, visibility changed with depth, currents, suspended particles, and shifting weather overhead. Animals occupied different levels of the water column, some remaining near shore, others moving across broader expanses. Every change in depth altered what could be seen, what could be hunted, and what dangers might remain concealed beyond immediate view. Life flowed through the seaway continuously. Predators searched for opportunities. Prey balanced feeding with vigilance. Scavengers recycled what others left behind. Shells settled toward the seafloor, while new generations entered the water above. The result was not chaos, but a vast ecological tapestry woven from countless interactions unfolding simultaneously across warm Cretaceous seas. Within such an environment, large hunters could thrive, but no creature emerged from the water fully formed. Even the most successful marine predators carried a deeper history within their bodies, one that stretched back beyond the waves themselves. Mosasaurus belonged to that older story, because its lineage began not in the ocean, but on land. Long before the lineage produced giant marine predators, its ancestors belonged to a world shaped by solid ground. Their feet met soil rather than open water. Their movements were guided by landscapes instead of currents, and their survival depended on challenges familiar to land-dwelling reptiles. Hidden within the history of Mosasaurus is one of evolution's recurring patterns, a journey in which animals that once lived on land gradually became creatures of the sea. Mosasaurs emerged from squamates, the great reptilian group that includes modern lizards and snakes. Although the oceans of the late Cretaceous eventually became their domain, their deeper ancestry remained tied to relatives whose descendants still bask in sunlight, climb rocks, burrow underground, or slip through vegetation. The Natural History Museum describes mosasaurs as close relatives of modern snakes and lizards, a relationship that can feel surprising when viewed against the immense scale and predatory power these animals would later achieve. Yet evolution often works through modification rather than invention, reshaping existing forms into something suited for entirely new surroundings. This return to the sea was not unique to mosasaurs. Across the history of life, vertebrates have repeatedly crossed the boundary between land and water. Mammalian ancestors eventually gave rise to whales, transforming hoofed terrestrial animals into masters of the open ocean. Earlier still, marine reptiles such as ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs followed their own paths into aquatic environments. Each lineage arrived there differently, carrying distinct anatomical histories that shaped the solutions evolution would later produce. The sea was not entered once. It was entered again and again by unrelated groups, each beginning with bodies designed for another world. The story of mosasaurs appears to follow the same broad pattern. Evidence suggests that their ancestors were terrestrial, or perhaps semi-aquatic reptiles living near coastlines and shallow marine environments. Exact details remain incomplete, preserved only in scattered fossils and evolutionary relationships, yet the larger transition is visible. Animals spending more time near water gained advantages from stronger swimming abilities. Movement through rivers, lagoons, estuaries, and coastal habitats rewarded bodies capable of navigating aquatic spaces with increasing efficiency. Across long spans of time, natural selection gradually favored traits that improved life in water. Tails became more important as sources of propulsion. Limbs that once supported weight on land became increasingly useful for steering and stabilization. Bodies that moved awkwardly through water gave way to forms that could slip through it with less resistance. Each generation carried only small changes, yet over millions of years, those changes accumulated into something entirely different from the ancestors that began the journey. It is important to remember that paleontology does not preserve every step of this transformation. The path from land-linked squamate ancestors to fully marine mosasaurs is reconstructed through fossil discoveries, comparative anatomy, and evolutionary relationships rather than an unbroken sequence of evidence. Some stages remain clearer than others. Certain details continue to be refined as new specimens are studied. What emerges is not a perfectly complete film, but a coherent pattern repeated throughout the history of life whenever vertebrates adapt to aquatic environments. As mosasaurs became increasingly specialized for marine existence, the pull of land faded from their anatomy. Features useful for walking gradually lost importance, while traits suited for swimming became more prominent. Their bodies reflected the demands of currents, prey pursuit, and movement through vast marine habitats. Evolution was not working toward a predetermined destination. It was simply favoring animals better suited to the conditions they encountered, generation after generation, until the descendants bore little resemblance to their distant terrestrial forebears. By the late Cretaceous, the transformation had become profound. The lineage no longer occupied the margins between land and water. It belonged to the sea itself, moving through marine ecosystems that stretched across ancient continents and supported some of the largest predators of the age. The old terrestrial inheritance had not vanished entirely, but it had been reshaped by millions of years spent adapting to a new environment. Once the lineage entered the sea, its body began to change into a weapon. Evolution rarely produces perfect copies. Even when different animals arrive at similar destinations, traces of their past remain visible in the way they move, feed, and inhabit the world around them. Mosasaurus spent its life in the ocean, yet its body still carried the legacy of reptilian ancestry, reshaped across millions of years into a form capable of navigating ancient seas with remarkable efficiency. Seen as a whole, the animal possessed a silhouette unlike anything alive today. A long body stretched behind an elongated head, supported by a flexible spine that allowed movement to ripple through much of its length. The torso was streamlined, reducing resistance as it traveled through water. Four paddle-like limbs extended from the sides, no longer serving as weight-bearing legs, but functioning as specialized structures adapted to marine life. Behind them trailed a powerful tail, a feature that became increasingly important as mosasaurs evolved into more capable swimmers. Each part of the body contributed to a single purpose. Movement through water rewards shapes that can travel efficiently while conserving energy, and the mosasaur form reflected those pressures. Unlike the rigid bodies of many terrestrial reptiles, its skeleton allowed a degree of flexibility well suited to aquatic motion. The result was an animal that could travel through broad marine environments while retaining the characteristics of its ancient lineage. Its method of swimming differed significantly from that of modern whales. Whales are mammals whose tails move in an up and down motion, generating thrust through powerful vertical strokes. Their bodies evolved from mammalian ancestors and followed a different evolutionary route into the sea. Mosasaurs inherited a reptilian framework instead. Evidence suggests that propulsion came largely through side-to-side movements, particularly in the tail and rear portions of the body. Rather than rising and falling through vertical tail beats, the animal likely drove itself forward through sweeping lateral motions that passed along its spine. The comparison with sharks reveals another important distinction. Sharks are fish, separated from mosasaurs by an immense evolutionary distance. Their skeletons, fins, and tail structures developed within a completely different branch of vertebrate history. A shark's body is built according to solutions refined through the biology of fish. Mosasaurus reached the same ocean through reptilian ancestry and therefore solved the challenges of marine locomotion in its own way. Similar ecological demands produced certain outward similarities, yet beneath the surface, the anatomical foundations remained very different. The paddle-like limbs illustrate this transformation particularly well. Their ancestors once functioned as walking limbs, useful for supporting bodies on land. In mosasaurs, those roles faded. The paddles became instruments of control rather than support. They helped stabilize the animal as it moved through water, reducing unwanted rolling and allowing smoother navigation. During changes in direction, they likely contributed to steering and maneuvering, helping a large predator adjust its position with precision. When pursuing prey, subtle movements of these limbs may have aided balance and control during sudden shifts in motion. The tail, meanwhile, emerged as the primary engine of movement. Fossil evidence from later mosasaurs within the broader group indicates increasingly sophisticated adaptations for tail-driven propulsion. Over time, evolutionary pressures favored animals capable of generating greater thrust through the rear of the body. As these changes accumulated, the tail became more than a simple extension of the spine. It became a powerful structure capable of converting muscular movement into forward momentum across open water. Taken together, the anatomy of Mosasaurus feels ancient because it truly was ancient. It was neither fish nor mammal, neither crocodile nor dinosaur, but a marine predator assembled through the gradual interaction of inheritance and environment. Land ancestry provided the starting materials. The sea supplied the pressures that reshaped them. Every paddle, vertebra, and muscle reflected that long conversation between biology and habitat. At the front of this carefully engineered body rested the feature that defined the animal more than any other, a skull built around the business of capturing and controlling prey. Among the fossils left behind by Mosasaurus, it is often the head that arrives first. Long after soft tissues vanished and entire bodies were scattered by time, skulls endured in stone with a presence that remains unmistakable. They emerge from chalk, limestone, and marine sediments, carrying the shape of an animal built around the act of feeding. Even separated from the rest of the skeleton, the skull alone communicates much of what Mosasaurus was. Its proportions were substantial without being exaggerated. The skull was long, extending forward in a shape suited for reaching and seizing prey. It was also deep, providing space for the muscles that powered its jaws. Every surface appears organized around function rather than ornament. There were no antlers, horns, or elaborate display structures. Instead, the architecture of the head focused on strength, leverage, and control. Bones supported muscle, muscle powered jaws, and jaws carried teeth. Together they formed the defining feature of one of the late Cretaceous ocean's most successful predators. For paleontologists, the skull holds special importance because Mosasaurus is often known more completely from cranial material than from fully preserved skeletons. Entire skeletons are rare gifts from the fossil record. More often, researchers work with partial remains, isolated bones, and fragments preserved under different conditions. The skull, therefore, plays an outsized role in understanding the animal. It influences how species are identified, how reconstructions are built, and even how body size is estimated. When a complete skeleton is absent, the proportions of the head can become one of the most important clues available. This reliance on skull material also helps explain why the history of Mosasaurus classification became surprisingly complex. For many years, the genus functioned almost as a container into which numerous specimens were placed. As discoveries accumulated across different regions and decades, distinctions between species sometimes became blurred. A significant rediagnosis published in 2017 revisited these issues, emphasizing how Mosasaurus had long been taxonomically complicated because the genus had served as a catch-all for multiple forms before later refinements clarified relationships. Such revisions are a normal part of paleontology, where new evidence steadily reshapes understanding and brings greater precision to familiar names. Yet beyond classification, the skull reveals something more immediate. It provides insight into how Mosasaurus interacted with the living world around it. The jaws appear designed not for delicate feeding, but for securing difficult prey. Once closed, they could grip with substantial force. Their likely role was to capture, control, and process animals that were often powerful enough to resist. Fish twisted, reptiles struggled, shell-bearing creatures resisted in different ways. A predator living among such prey needed a feeding apparatus capable of maintaining control after contact was made. Its approach differed from that of many modern animals. Mosasaurus was not chewing in the mammalian sense. Mammals often use specialized teeth and jaw motions to grind food into smaller pieces before swallowing. The mechanics of Mosasaurus followed a different pattern, nor was it slicing through flesh in precisely the way a shark does. Sharks employ tooth arrangements and feeding strategies shaped by the evolutionary history of fish. Mosasaurus relied on reptilian jaws and teeth working together to seize prey, hold it securely, and break it down through forceful bites and manipulation. This makes the skull more than an anatomical feature. It becomes a focal point for understanding survival within a crowded ecosystem. Predators were surrounded by competitors, hazards, and prey capable of fighting back. Efficiency mattered. Hesitation carried costs. The moment of contact between hunter and prey often determined what followed. In many encounters, the first successful bite may have separated nourishment from injury, success from failure, and energy gained from energy lost. The skull therefore stands as the clearest expression of the animal's role within its environment. It concentrated strength, precision, and evolutionary refinement into a single structure. And inside that skull were teeth designed for a violent ocean. A single tooth can outlast an entire animal. Long after muscle, skin, and even much of the skeleton have disappeared, teeth often remain behind, preserved within ancient sediments like small records of vanished lives. For mosasaurs, these durable structures have become some of the most informative fossils available, carrying clues about diet, behavior, and the many ways different species interacted with their environment. The teeth of Mosasaurus were not identical from front to back, nor were all mosasaurs equipped with exactly the same dental tools. Shape varied according to species and position within the jaw. Some teeth were more conical, suited to gripping and securing prey. Others possessed a more blade-like profile, giving them greater effectiveness when dealing with larger or more challenging food items. Despite these differences, many shared a characteristic form that curved gently backward toward the throat. This recurved shape appears repeatedly throughout the group and reveals much about how these predators handled their meals. The advantage of a backward curve becomes clear when viewed through the mechanics of capture. Water creates constant opportunities for escape. Fish twist, reptiles struggle. Soft-bodied prey can slip free with surprising ease. A recurved tooth works against that possibility. Once prey moved deeper into the mouth, the angle of the teeth made retreat increasingly difficult. Forward movement remained possible, but pulling away became more challenging. The mouth functioned less like a cutting instrument and more like a carefully arranged series of hooks guiding captured prey inward. This design reflects the realities of life in an aquatic ecosystem. Unlike terrestrial predators that often rely upon stable footing and gravity, marine hunters must maintain control in a fluid environment where both predator and prey remain in motion. Grip becomes critically important. Every tooth contributes to holding, stabilizing, and managing struggling animals until they can be swallowed or broken down into manageable pieces. The effectiveness of the system depended not on a single enormous tooth, but on the coordinated action of many teeth working together. Like numerous living reptiles, mosasaurs also replaced their teeth throughout life. Individual teeth were not permanent possessions. As older teeth wore down, broke, or became less effective, new ones developed and emerged to take their place. This process helped maintain a functional feeding apparatus, despite the constant stresses associated with capturing prey. A lifetime of hunting inevitably damages teeth, yet replacement ensured that the animal remained equipped for the demands of its environment. Those signs of wear are valuable to paleontologists. Teeth do more than reveal anatomy. They preserve traces of behavior. Under magnification, their surfaces may contain tiny scratches, pits, and patterns produced through repeated contact with food. This microwear acts almost like a record written across enamel. Different diets leave different marks, allowing researchers to compare species and infer how they may have used their teeth in daily life. Recent research into mosasaur feeding ecology has increasingly combined tooth microwear studies with analyses of tooth strength and structure. Together, these approaches help scientists explore how different mosasaurs occupy distinct ecological roles. Some species appear better suited for handling harder prey. Others may have specialized in softer or more agile food sources. Rather than viewing all mosasaurs as identical hunters, these studies reveal a family of predators experimenting with different feeding strategies across ancient seas. In Mosasaurus itself, the teeth were clearly not designed for delicate feeding. They were not tools for nibbling vegetation or carefully picking apart small food items. Their form reflects a world where prey often resisted capture and where successful feeding required secure control. Grip mattered, tearing mattered, maintaining possession of a meal mattered. Every curve and surface contributed to those functions, transforming the mouth into an effective instrument for managing difficult prey within a competitive ecosystem. Yet, the visible teeth lining the jaws represented only part of the feeding system. Hidden deeper within the mouth were additional structures that added another layer of control, revealing that Mosasaurus did not rely only on the visible teeth at the front of the mouth. The most important parts of a feeding system are not always visible at first glance. A skull displayed in a museum often draws attention to the large teeth lining the jaws. Yet, deeper within the mouth of many mosasaurs lay another set of structures that transformed the act of feeding into something far more sophisticated. Hidden beyond the obvious bite was a second layer of anatomy, one that helped solve the practical challenges of handling prey in an aquatic world. Many mosasaurs possessed additional teeth attached to the pterygoid bones, structures located within the roof and rear portions of the mouth. These pterygoid teeth did not sit along the outer jawline where they could be easily seen. Instead, they occupied positions deeper inside the oral cavity, forming a secondary array of points behind the main teeth. Their placement reveals that feeding involved more than simply grabbing prey and swallowing it. Once an animal had been captured, the real work often began. Water creates unique problems for predators. A struggling fish does not remain still. Soft-bodied prey can twist unexpectedly. Even after a successful bite, maintaining control requires continuous management. Pterygoid teeth appear to have helped address this challenge by providing additional surfaces capable of gripping food after it entered the mouth. Rather than relying entirely upon the outer jaws, Mosasaurs could potentially use these internal teeth to help secure prey and limit opportunities for escape. Researchers have suggested several possible functions for these structures. One likely role involved helping move prey deeper into the throat. As food shifted backward, the pterygoid teeth may have acted as a series of anchors, maintaining control while the animal repositioned its meal. Another possibility is that they reduced the chance of captured prey reversing direction and slipping free. Together with the jaws and surrounding tissues, they created a feeding apparatus that extended beyond the obvious bite. A useful comparison can be found among some living reptiles. Modern snakes employ complex interactions between their jaws, mouths, and throat structures to manipulate prey during feeding. Mosasaurs were not snakes, and their feeding behavior should not be imagined as identical. Nevertheless, both belong within the broader squamate lineage, and the comparison highlights an important idea. The mouth can function as an active system for controlling food rather than a simple opening through which prey passes. Viewed in this way, the feeding apparatus of Mosasaurus begins to resemble a coordinated processing system. The outer teeth secured initial contact. Internal structures may have assisted with retention and transport. Muscles, bones, and soft tissues worked together to manage prey that was often difficult to handle. The process extended beyond the moment of capture and continued until food moved safely toward digestion. Such adaptations become easier to appreciate when considering the nature of potential prey. Many animals inhabiting late Cretaceous seas were covered in scales, shells, or protective armor. Others possessed streamlined bodies evolved specifically to move through water efficiently. Some prey items may have been small enough to swallow relatively quickly, while others presented a more complicated challenge. Not every meal would have cooperated with the limitations imposed by skull size and throat dimensions. Evidence associated with Mosasaurus suggests that at least some prey larger than the skull could be processed in pieces rather than swallowed whole. This possibility broadens the range of food available to a large predator. Instead of being restricted to items that could pass through the mouth intact, Mosasaurus could potentially break down larger animals into manageable portions. The feeding system therefore combined capture, retention, manipulation, and processing into a single, integrated mechanism. All of this occurred beneath the surface of ancient seas, where opportunities could appear and disappear quickly. Success depended not only upon possessing effective jaws and hidden teeth, but also upon placing those tools in the right position at the right moment. To use that mouth effectively, Mosasaurus had to move through water with control. Water rewards efficiency. Every movement requires energy. Every change in direction carries a cost, and every unnecessary motion creates resistance. For an animal the size of Mosasaurus, these realities shaped the way it traveled through its world. Survival did not depend upon endless speed. It depended upon moving effectively through a marine environment where distance, opportunity, and timing were constantly changing. Imagine a long body suspended beneath the surface, supported not by frantic activity but by steady motion. The animal did not need to thrash through the water to remain capable of hunting. Its form had already been refined by millions of years of adaptation to aquatic life. Much of its propulsion likely came from side-to-side movement, passing through the rear of the body and into the tail. As muscles contracted, waves of motion traveled along the spine, generating thrust that pushed the animal forward through the surrounding water. The tail served as the primary source of power. Rather than functioning as a passive extension behind the body, it transformed muscular effort into forward movement. Each sweep displaced water and generated momentum. The rest of the body contributed as well, particularly through controlled lateral motion that worked in coordination with the tail. Together they formed a propulsion system rooted in reptilian ancestry, yet highly adapted to marine existence. The paddle-like limbs played a different role. Their importance was not centered on producing major thrust. Instead, they acted as stabilizers and steering surfaces. Subtle adjustments of these paddles could influence balance, direction, and positioning. As the animal moved through varying conditions, the limbs helped maintain control and reduced unnecessary rolling or drifting. They allowed the body to remain composed while the tail provided most of the driving force. Hydrodynamics influenced every aspect of this arrangement. A streamlined body reduces drag, allowing movement with less wasted energy. Smooth contours help water flow around the animal rather than resisting its passage. Stability becomes easier to maintain, and propulsion becomes more effective. The overall body plan of Mosasaurus reflects these principles. Evolution did not create a perfect machine, but it produced an animal increasingly suited to the demands of aquatic travel. This efficiency becomes especially important when considering how large predators often hunt. Popular imagination sometimes favors endless pursuit, yet sustained high speed is costly. A prolonged chase consumes oxygen and expends valuable energy. If prey escapes, the investment is lost. For a giant marine reptile, repeated failures would carry consequences. Natural selection tends to favor strategies that balance effort with reward. Mosasaurus likely spent much of its time cruising rather than sprinting. It could travel through its environment at a measured pace, covering territory while conserving resources. Periods of movement may have alternated with periods of waiting, observation, or slow repositioning. Such behavior appears throughout the animal kingdom because efficiency often proves more valuable than constant exertion. When opportunities appeared, however, the rhythm could change rapidly. A predator moving calmly through the water can still accelerate over short distances. The combination of tail power, body flexibility, and controlled steering would have allowed bursts of motion when needed. Sudden turns near prey may have been particularly important. In aquatic environments, the ability to adjust direction quickly can matter as much as raw speed. A well-timed maneuver may determine whether prey escapes or remains within reach. This creates an image quite different from continuous violence or relentless pursuit. Mosasaurus was a large marine reptile, carrying considerable mass through water with purpose and control. Its movements were likely shaped by patience as much as power, by conservation as much as acceleration. The body did not need to be in constant motion to remain effective. It simply needed to be ready. Across the late Cretaceous seas, readiness mattered. Fish, reptiles, cephalopods, birds, and countless other animals occupied different levels of the ecosystem, spread across vast distances and habitats. Movement mattered because the prey field was enormous. Abundance and danger often grow together. In the late Cretaceous seas, the extraordinary productivity that supported giant predators also created an immense variety of potential prey. Life filled nearly every level of the ecosystem, from drifting organisms too small to see clearly to marine reptiles large enough to challenge one another for resources. For an animal capable of taking advantage of this richness, the ocean offered a vast menu, yet access to that menu depended entirely upon the ability to survive within it. Large, bony fish formed one of the most important sources of food available to marine predators. These fish occupied many ecological roles and ranged widely in size, creating opportunities for hunters throughout the ecosystem. Smaller fish were even more abundant. They moved in schools, concentrated energy from lower levels of the food web, and served as prey for a remarkable variety of animals. Their presence helped support larger predators, linking microscopic marine productivity to the giants swimming above. Ammonites also belonged to this world. Their coiled shells drifted through Cretaceous waters in astonishing diversity. Some occupied open marine habitats, while others followed different ecological pathways. Although famous today because their shells fossilized so readily, they were once living participants in the food web, interacting with predators and prey alike. Marine turtles shared the same seas, carrying protective shells through environments where defense often determined survival. Diving birds crossed the boundary between air and water, feeding within marine habitats while remaining tied to the skies above. Their lives intersected with the ocean in ways that brought them within reach of aquatic hunters. Other marine reptiles added further complexity. Plesiosaurs occupied their own ecological niches and represented potential prey under certain circumstances. Smaller mosasaurs also existed within these environments, creating the possibility that larger relatives occasionally fed upon members of their own broader family. In addition to active hunting, carrion provided another source of nourishment. A dead animal drifting through the sea became part of the ecosystem's ongoing circulation of energy, attracting scavengers capable of taking advantage of unexpected opportunities. Evidence from fossils supports this broad dietary picture. Rare preserved stomach contents, along with other forms of direct evidence, indicate that mosasaurs consumed fish, seabirds, plesiosaurs, and smaller mosasaurs. These discoveries provide valuable glimpses into feeding behavior because they move beyond inference and preserve actual traces of ancient meals. Although such evidence is uncommon, it confirms that mosasaurs occupied an adaptable, predatory role capable of encompassing a wide range of prey. That adaptability likely varied across the group. Not all mosasaurs were identical, and their diets almost certainly reflected those differences. Species with different tooth shapes may have favored different prey. Body size influenced what could be captured and processed. Habitat shaped which animals were encountered regularly. Age mattered as well, since a juvenile predator faces different opportunities and limitations than a fully grown adult. Local conditions further influenced available resources, meaning that two mosasaurs, separated by geography, might not have relied upon exactly the same food sources, even if they belonged to related lineages. Viewed from a distance, this complexity reveals an important truth about ancient marine ecosystems. Dominance was never the product of a single predator acting alone. The health and structure of the environment depended upon countless interactions occurring simultaneously. Predators hunted prey. Predators hunted other predators. Scavengers consumed what hunting left behind. Animals competed, specialized, adapted, and occupied overlapping ecological spaces. The result was not a simple hierarchy, but a dense network of relationships sustained by constant movement of energy through the food web. For this reason, the reputation of the late Cretaceous seas rests on more than the presence of Mosasaurus. A dangerous ecosystem is not defined by one formidable hunter. It emerges from the coexistence of many capable hunters sharing the same waters, each contributing to a world where survival depended upon awareness, adaptation, and opportunity. One of the first major dangers in that sea was not a reptile at all. Not every significant predator of the late Cretaceous carried paddles or belonged to the reptile lineage. Beneath the larger silhouettes that often dominate reconstructions of ancient seas swam another class of hunters, animals whose success came not from reptilian ancestry, but from the long evolutionary history of fish. Their presence added complexity to the ecosystem and reminds us that danger in the Cretaceous ocean was distributed across many levels of the food web. Among the most impressive was Xiphictinus, a giant predatory bony fish that patrolled marine environments during the late Cretaceous. Although often overshadowed by marine reptiles in popular imagination, Xiphictinus was a formidable animal in its own right. Its body was built for active predation, with powerful jaws and a streamlined shape suited to pursuing prey through open water. Fossils have made the species particularly famous because some specimens preserve dramatic evidence of feeding behavior. In several cases, the remains of large prey animals have been discovered inside the fish itself, revealing meals that were astonishingly substantial relative to the predator's own body. These discoveries offer an important reminder about the structure of the ecosystem. The food web did not consist simply of small fish feeding larger reptiles. Significant predators existed at multiple levels. Large fish hunted other fish. Some consumed prey that modern observers might assume was beyond their reach. In such a system, even animals occupying intermediate positions in the food chain could be dangerous. Size alone did not determine ecological influence. A successful predator could exert considerable pressure on the animals around it, regardless of whether it belonged to the highest trophic level. Another notable fish from these seas was Enchodus. It is sometimes given the nickname saber-toothed herring, though the phrase can create a misleading impression if taken too literally. Enchodus was not a herring in the modern sense. The nickname arose from its striking fang-like teeth, which projected prominently from the jaws and made the animal memorable to paleontologists and fossil collectors alike. These teeth hint at a predatory lifestyle centered on capturing other marine animals, adding yet another specialized hunter to an already crowded environment. Fish like Xiphictinus and Enchodus formed part of a constantly moving layer of biological energy that connected the ecosystem together. Countless smaller fish gathered into schools that shifted across marine habitats in search of food and favorable conditions. Predatory fish pursued those schools, turning concentrations of prey into opportunities. Larger animals followed the predators in turn. Energy moved upward through the food web, not as a neat ladder, but as an intricate network of interactions occurring simultaneously across vast stretches of water. This dynamic produced a remarkable degree of ecological overlap. A fish pursuing smaller prey could become prey itself. A marine reptile feeding on predatory fish might compete with other large hunters targeting the same resources. Every level of the system remained connected to the levels above and below it. The boundaries separating predator and prey often depended upon size, circumstance, and opportunity. rather than simple categories. Seen in this context, the world inhabited by Mosasaurus becomes more complex than the image of a lone ruler dominating passive surroundings. The ocean was not a peaceful fish tank populated by harmless prey waiting to be consumed. It was a living system populated by capable hunters of many forms. Large fish occupied important positions within that system, influencing the movement of energy and contributing to the ecological pressures that shaped other animals around them. For Mosasaurus, such predators represented part of the environment that helped define success. To thrive within these seas required navigating a world where fish could be powerful, abundant, and ecologically significant. The ocean rewarded adaptability because competition existed throughout the food web. Even beneath the largest marine reptiles swam predators worthy of respect, and alongside those fish were sharks that left scars even on giants. The fossil record sometimes preserves moments that no living eye witnessed. A scar sealed within bone, a healed injury hidden beneath ancient tissue, or a tooth left behind during a violent encounter can survive for millions of years. These traces reveal that the great marine reptiles of the late Cretaceous did not move through their world unchallenged. Among the animals capable of interacting with them in consequential ways were the sharks that shared the same seas. Cretaceous sharks were not minor figures drifting at the edge of the ecosystem. They occupied important predatory roles and contributed to the complexity of marine food webs across vast regions. Their evolutionary history already stretched deep into the past, and by the time Mosasaurus appeared, sharks had become highly successful components of ocean ecosystems. They hunted, scavenged, migrated, and adapted alongside the reptiles, fish, cephalopods, and other animals that populated the late Cretaceous world. Among the sharks often associated with these environments were Squalocorax and Cretoxorhina. Each represented a different approach to life in the sea. Squalocorax is frequently linked with scavenging as well as active feeding, while Cretoxorhina grew into a powerful predatory shark capable of occupying an important position within marine communities. Together, they help illustrate the diversity present among the sharks of the period. These were not identical animals, performing identical ecological functions. They occupied different niches within an already crowded environment. The strongest evidence for their interactions with mosasaurs comes not from imagination but from fossils themselves. Paleontologists have identified shark bite marks on mosasaur bones, preserving direct signs of contact between these animals. Such marks immediately raise important possibilities. In some cases, sharks may have been feeding on carcasses after death. Scavenging is a normal and widespread ecological behavior, and large marine predators often take advantage of available carrion. A bite mark alone does not necessarily indicate an attack on a living animal. Other discoveries tell a more complex story. Certain injuries show evidence of healing, meaning the mosasaur survived long enough for its body to respond to the damage. Bone began repairing itself, recording the encounter within the skeleton. These healed wounds demonstrate that at least some mosasaurs experienced shark bites during life and continued living afterward. The interaction therefore extended beyond simple scavenging in every case. Research examining shark bite marks from Kansas and from the Maastrichtian-type area has provided particularly valuable insight. The evidence points toward a mixture of behaviors, including both scavenging and active predation. Some fossils preserve healed injuries, while one remarkable case involved a shark tooth associated with an infected abscess in a mosasaur. Such discoveries transform abstract ecological relationships into tangible events preserved across geological time. They reveal animals interacting directly within the same environment, sometimes with lasting consequences. These traces are significant because they help clarify what dominance actually meant in the late Cretaceous ocean. Mosasaurus occupied the upper levels of the marine food web and functioned as a major predator, yet that status did not place it beyond risk. Ecological systems rarely operate through absolute hierarchies. Even highly successful predators encounter hazards, competitors, injuries, disease, and moments of vulnerability. A large marine reptile could possess formidable jaws and still bear evidence of dangerous encounters. It is important not to turn these fossils into simplistic contests between sharks and mosasaurs. The evidence does not support a story of one group consistently overpowering the other. Instead, it reveals a more interesting reality. These animals shared ecosystems where opportunities and dangers overlapped. Sharks could scavenge mosasaur remains. Sharks could bite living mosasaurs. Mosasaurs could survive such encounters. Both belonged to a world where survival depended upon navigating countless interactions with other capable predators. The ocean that supported Mosasaurus was therefore not organized around a single ruler standing above all others. It was a network of relationships, risks, and adaptations extending across many forms of life. Sharks formed an important part of that picture, but sharks were only one rival shape in the water, long before mosasaurs rose to prominence in the late Cretaceous seas. Another lineage of marine reptiles had already spent millions of years refining its place within the ocean. Their fossils would later become some of the most recognizable in paleontology, not because they resembled modern animals, but because they seemed almost dreamlike in their proportions. Broad bodies drifted beneath ancient waters, propelled by powerful flippers, while in some forms remarkably long necks extended outward into the surrounding sea. These animals were plesiosaurs, a diverse group of marine reptiles whose history stretched deep into the Mesozoic era. Like mosasaurs, they spent their lives in marine environments and depended upon aquatic ecosystems for survival. Yet despite their reptilian nature, they were not dinosaurs. The Natural History Museum clearly distinguishes plesiosaurs as marine reptiles, separate from the dinosaur lineage that occupied the continents above. Their evolutionary story followed a different path, one that produced some of the most distinctive body plans ever seen among vertebrates. For many people, the image of a plesiosaur begins with the long neck displayed by certain groups. In those species, the neck could contain an extraordinary number of vertebrae, creating an animal whose silhouette differed dramatically from that of other marine predators. Yet long necks represent only part of the story. Plesiosaurs generally possessed broad bodies and four large flippers that functioned as the primary means of locomotion. Rather than relying on a powerful tail for propulsion in the way mosasaurs likely did, they moved through the water using coordinated strokes of their flippers, creating a swimming style, unlike that of the giant marine reptiles that would later share their world. The contrast between plesiosaurs and Mosasaurus highlights one of the most fascinating aspects of ancient oceans. Different evolutionary lineages often arrived at marine life through entirely different anatomical solutions. Mosasaurus carried the legacy of squamate ancestry and a body built around an elongated form, tail-driven movement, and powerful jaws. Plesiosaurs followed another route. Their four strong flippers provided propulsion and maneuverability, allowing them to exploit marine habitats through a design that was uniquely their own. These differences likely influenced feeding behavior as well. Distinct body plans create distinct opportunities. Animals with different methods of swimming often access different prey, occupy different hunting grounds, or interact with their environment in different ways. Some plesiosaurs may have specialized in prey that required precise maneuvering or access to particular parts of the water column. Others may have occupied ecological roles that only partially overlapped with those of large mosasaurs. The details varied across a diverse group that existed for millions of years and included many different species. By the time mosasaurs reached their peak prominence, plesiosaurs were already established members of marine ecosystems. They were not newcomers displaced immediately by a rising rival. Instead, both groups coexisted within the same broad marine worlds, contributing to ecosystems that supported multiple kinds of large reptiles simultaneously. Their presence demonstrates that the late Cretaceous ocean was capable of sustaining more than one successful design for marine predation. Coexistence does not necessarily imply identical lifestyles. Ecological communities often allow large predators to share space by focusing on different resources, habitats, or prey sizes. Some plesiosaurs may have occupied niches distinct from those used by mosasaurs. Others, particularly smaller or more vulnerable individuals, may occasionally have become prey for large mosasaurs themselves. Fossil evidence suggests interactions between these groups, reminding us that even major predators can become part of another predator's diet under the right circumstances. Taken together, these relationships deepen the picture of the ancient sea. It was not a world dominated by a single successful body plan. Instead, it hosted multiple marine reptile lineages, each representing a different evolutionary experiment in ocean life. Long necks, broad bodies, flippers, tails, powerful jaws, and specialized feeding strategies all existed together within the same ecosystems. Even armored and shelled animals were not outside the story. Some of the most revealing witnesses to the late Cretaceous ocean never possessed jaws powerful enough to dominate their surroundings. They carried their histories differently, coiled within protective shells that settled onto ancient seafloors after death and remained there long enough to become part of the fossil record. Among the most abundant and recognizable inhabitants of those seas were the ammonites, extinct cephalopods whose spiral shells have become enduring symbols of vanished marine worlds. Ammonites occupied a wide range of ecological roles and flourished throughout the Cretaceous period. Though distant relatives of modern squid, octopuses, and nautiluses, they followed their own evolutionary path, producing an astonishing diversity of forms. Their chambers allowed buoyancy control, enabling them to inhabit marine environments that stretched across broad portions of the ancient world. They were neither rare curiosities nor insignificant background creatures. They formed a substantial component of marine ecosystems and likely served as food for a variety of predators. One reason ammonites remain so important to paleontology is that their shells fossilize exceptionally well. Bone is not the only material capable of preserving information about ancient life. Shells can survive long after the animals that created them have disappeared, carrying evidence of growth, injury, environmental conditions, and interactions with other organisms. Because ammonites were abundant and left behind durable remains, they provide an unusually detailed archive of life within ancient oceans. This durability allows paleontologists to investigate a different kind of evidence for predation. Instead of examining bite marks on skeletons, researchers can study damage preserved directly on shells. Cracks, punctures, and unusual breakage patterns sometimes appear in ammonite fossils, raising questions about how those marks were created. Each damaged shell becomes a small puzzle, preserving traces of events that occurred millions of years ago. Some of these marks have attracted particular attention because they resemble the sort of damage that might result from an attack by a large predator. Certain punctures and fractures have been interpreted by some researchers as possible bite traces left by mosasaurs. The reasoning often involves comparing the spacing, shape, and location of the damage with what is known about mosasaur dentition and feeding behavior. When patterns align in convincing ways, the possibility of predator interaction becomes difficult to ignore. Yet paleontology rarely operates through certainty alone. Other explanations have also been proposed for some damaged shells. Geological processes can alter fossils after burial. Injuries may originate from different predators. Natural breakage can sometimes produce patterns that resemble biological damage. For this reason, the science depends upon careful comparison rather than dramatic assumptions. Researchers examine evidence, test competing explanations, and evaluate which interpretation best matches the available data. Studies and later discussions have revisited these punctured ammonites repeatedly, exploring whether particular damage patterns truly represent mosasaur feeding activity or whether alternative causes remain more likely. The process reflects a broader principle within paleontology. Ancient events cannot be observed directly, so conclusions emerge through the gradual accumulation of evidence rather than through single discoveries alone. Every shell becomes part of a larger conversation about how extinct ecosystems functioned. What makes these fossils especially valuable is the perspective they provide. Predation is often reconstructed from bones, teeth, and skeletons, yet ammonite shells offer another source of information. They preserve traces of interaction in a different medium. A predator does not need to leave a mark on another vertebrate for evidence of feeding to survive. Sometimes the record exists within a spiral shell resting quietly in stone. In this way, ammonites allow glimpses of ecological relationships that might otherwise remain hidden. They reveal that evidence of conflict and survival can be preserved outside the bodies of the largest animals. The fossil record records more than anatomy. It records encounters. Sometimes those encounters appear as scars written into bone. Sometimes they remain etched into shell. The ocean's violence was recorded in both, but the most unsettling rivals of Mosasaurus may have been its own relatives. Names can sometimes create the illusion of simplicity. A single famous genus becomes so recognizable that it begins to stand in for an entire family of animals. And over time, the diversity behind that name fades from view. Mosasaurus often occupies that position in discussions of late Cretaceous oceans. Yet Mosasaurus was only one genus among a broader and remarkably varied group known collectively as the mosasaurs. The distinction matters because the ancient seas were not inhabited by endless copies of the same predator. Mosasaurus belonged to a larger family whose members explored different ecological opportunities through variations in body shape, feeding style, and anatomy. The term mosasaur refers to this broader family of marine reptiles, while Mosasaurus identifies a particular genus within it. Understanding that difference reveals a marine world populated not by a single, successful design, but by many related predators evolving along different paths. Among the best-known members of this family was Tylosaurus, a large and highly specialized predator recognized by its elongated snout. Platecarpus occupied a different place within the group and is frequently represented by exceptionally informative fossils that have helped researchers understand mosasaur anatomy and soft tissue preservation. Clydas tended toward a more slender build, suited to a different style of movement and prey capture. Prognathodon developed powerful jaws and robust dentition, while Globidens became famous for teeth adapted to handling harder prey. Alongside these genera stood Mosasaurus itself, one branch within a much larger evolutionary story. These differences were not merely cosmetic, Body shape influences how an animal moves through water, what prey it can capture, and how it competes with other predators. Some mosasaurs possess streamlined forms that may have favored pursuit of agile prey. Others developed heavier skulls and stronger teeth capable of exerting greater force. In certain species, teeth became particularly robust and rounded, allowing them to crush hard-shelled animals that would have posed challenges for predators equipped with more delicate dentition. Elsewhere within the family, sharper teeth proved better suited for gripping, cutting, or controlling softer prey. The result was a family displaying considerable ecological variety despite shared ancestry. Evolution repeatedly modified the same basic marine reptile framework, producing animals adapted to different resources within the same broad marine environments. Rather than converging on a single perfect solution, mosasaurs diversified into forms capable of exploiting a range of opportunities. The Natural History Museum notes that mosasaurs were a highly successful group that existed during a relatively brief yet important interval of geological history. Their rise occurred rapidly in evolutionary terms, and within that span, they expanded into an impressive assortment of ecological roles. This success reflects not only the adaptability of individual genera, but also the flexibility of the family as a whole. Different lineages responded to different pressures, creating a collection of predators whose combined diversity helped shape the ecosystems they inhabited. This diversity changes how Mosasaurus itself should be viewed. It was not ruling over empty water populated solely by prey, nor was it surrounded only by unrelated competitors, such as sharks, fish, or plesiosaurs. It existed within a family of predators that included multiple approaches to survival. Close relatives were experimenting with different hunting strategies, different diets, and different ways of interacting with the marine environment. In some regions, several mosasaur genera may have shared the same broad ecosystems while focusing on different resources. One lineage might be better equipped for seizing swift prey. Another could specialize in harder food sources. A third might occupy slightly different habitats or depths. Their coexistence reflects an important feature of ecological systems, namely that success often emerges through specialization rather than direct competition for identical resources. Seen together, the mosasaurs become less like a single predator and more like an evolutionary radiation unfolding across ancient seas. Their shared ancestry connected them, yet their differences allowed them to spread into a variety of ecological roles. That diversity raises a question. How did they avoid all doing the same thing? Competition does not always remove diversity. In many ecosystems, the opposite occurs. Animals survive alongside one another because they find different ways to use the same world. Paleontologists describe this pattern as niche partitioning, the process through which different species rely on different resources, prey, habitats, or hunting methods so they are not constantly competing for exactly the same opportunities. In the late Cretaceous ocean, this principle likely helped explain how so many large predators could occupy the same seas at the same time. At first glance, the situation seems difficult to imagine. Multiple mosasaur genera shared broad marine environments. Large fish hunted actively. Sharks occupied important predatory roles. Marine reptiles of different lineages remained present across various habitats. Yet, ecosystems can support remarkable diversity when species divide resources in subtle ways. The ocean did not need separate worlds for every predator. It only needed enough ecological variation for each to specialize. One possibility involves prey size. Predators equipped for handling large animals do not necessarily focus on the same food as predators better suited to smaller prey. Differences in body size, jaw strength, and tooth structure influence what can be captured efficiently. Two hunters may occupy the same region while targeting different portions of the available food web. In this way, competition is reduced because the animals are not pursuing identical resources. Depth may have played a role as well. The ocean is layered vertically as much as it is horizontally. Conditions change with distance below the surface, influencing where prey gathers and where predators spend time searching. Some mosasaurs may have spent more time in certain portions of the water column than others. Even modest differences in preferred depth can reduce overlap between species sharing the same broader environment. Distance from shore offers another possible form of partitioning. Coastal waters differ from offshore environments in temperature, productivity, prey composition, and physical conditions. Some predators may have frequented regions closer to land, while others spent more time farther from coastal influence. The result would be a division of ecological space that allowed related animals to coexist without constant direct competition. Teeth provide particularly valuable clues. Throughout the mosasaur family, dental variation is striking. Some species developed teeth better suited for gripping and cutting. Others possessed more robust dentition capable of handling harder prey. Such differences suggest that feeding strategies were not identical across the group. The shape of a tooth reflects the challenges it evolved to address, and those challenges often relate directly to diet. Hunting style likely contributed as well. Predators can exploit the same ecosystem through different behaviors. One species may rely more heavily on pursuit, another may depend upon ambush opportunities. Differences in movement, prey selection, and feeding mechanics create additional layers of ecological separation. These distinctions are not always preserved directly in fossils, yet anatomy often provides hints about how animals may have behaved. Researchers have explored these possibilities through multiple lines of evidence. Isotope studies, for example, can provide information about habitat use and feeding ecology. Variations in isotopic signatures sometimes suggest that related animals occupied different environmental settings or relied upon different food sources. Tooth morphology offers another line of evidence, revealing patterns that may indicate dietary specialization. Together, these approaches help reconstruct how ancient predators shared marine ecosystems. The contrast between Mosasaurus and Prognathodon illustrates the idea particularly well. Prognathodon possessed notably robust teeth that may indicate an ability to process harder prey items. Mosasaurus, depending on the species being examined, may have been better adapted for different prey types. The evidence does not support a rigid division in every circumstance, yet it suggests meaningful ecological distinctions between related predators. Careful language remains important. Fossils rarely preserve complete ecological stories. The evidence likely points toward specialization. Tooth differences suggest varying feeding strategies. Isotopic patterns may indicate habitat differences. Together, they reveal a sea organized by countless subtle divisions. Once you know the sea was divided into invisible hunting lanes, the hunt itself becomes easier to picture. Hunting leaves surprisingly few direct records behind. No fossil preserves a complete pursuit from beginning to end. No ancient shoreline holds a perfect account of how Mosasaurus selected a target, approached it, and secured a meal. What remains are bones, teeth, bite marks, stomach contents, and the anatomy of the predator itself. From these fragments, paleontologists build careful reconstructions, not certainties, but informed models shaped by evidence and comparison. The picture that emerges is less dramatic than popular imagination sometimes prefers, yet in many ways more interesting. Mosasaurus was a large marine reptile carrying considerable mass through water. Such an animal likely benefited from efficiency. Endless high-speed pursuit would have consumed oxygen and energy while increasing the chance of injury. Large predators across many ecosystems often succeed not by chasing continuously, but by positioning themselves advantageously before committing to an attack. Water provides many opportunities for concealment. Visibility changes with depth, suspended particles, light conditions, and distance. A predator does not need complete darkness to remain difficult to detect. Simply approaching from below, from behind, or from a region of reduced visibility can provide an advantage. The ocean itself becomes part of the hunting strategy, creating barriers to perception that favor a patient hunter. A likely sequence begins with approach rather than acceleration. Mosasaurus may have spent much of its hunting time closing distance gradually, moving in a controlled manner while remaining as inconspicuous as possible. Instead of revealing its presence through unnecessary speed, it could allow water conditions and positioning to work in its favor. Every meter gained before the final attack reduced the effort required during the decisive moment. Only after that distance had narrowed would sudden acceleration become valuable. The powerful tail and flexible body discussed earlier were not merely tools for travel. They also provided the capacity for short bursts of movement when circumstances demanded it. A predator that begins close to its target requires less time and energy to make contact than one attempting to pursue prey across open water. This logic appears repeatedly in nature because surprise offers advantages beyond energy conservation. A successful ambush reduces the opportunity for prey to escape. It can also reduce the likelihood of injury to the predator. Every struggle carries risk. Fish possess spines. Reptiles resist capture. Larger prey may fight back with considerable force. Shortening the encounter increases the chance of a favorable outcome. Once contact occurred, the evidence suggests that control became the priority. The teeth and jaw structures already described appear better suited for gripping and managing prey than for delicate feeding. Capture was only the beginning. A struggling animal needed to be restrained before it could be swallowed or processed further. The method likely varied according to prey size. Smaller animals may have been swallowed relatively directly after capture. Their size reduced handling difficulties, allowing the predator to move efficiently from attack to consumption. Larger prey presented a different challenge. Such animals may have required repeated bites, forceful manipulation, or physical breakdown into more manageable portions. Evidence from mosasaur feeding suggests that prey larger than the skull could be processed in pieces rather than swallowed intact, expanding the range of possible food sources available to a large hunter. Even so, caution remains essential when imagining specific scenes. Fossil evidence of consumed prey establishes what mosasaurs ate, but not every detail of how individual hunts unfolded. Exact behaviors remain reconstructions built from anatomy and ecological principles. The goal is not to create cinematic certainty where none exists. It is to understand what the available evidence makes plausible. The resulting image is one of measured power rather than constant aggression. A large reptile moves steadily through the water. Distance closes. Visibility conceals. Motion remains controlled until a brief moment of acceleration transforms patience into action. The attack is sudden because most of the work happened beforehand. Yet no matter how effective the strategy, risk never disappeared. In an ecosystem filled with capable prey and competing predators, every successful hunt carried its own costs. But every attack carried danger back toward the predator. Not every story preserved in stone is a story of growth. Some are stories of survival. A fossilized skeleton may appear still and complete when displayed in a museum. Yet, closer examination often reveals traces of a life that was anything but smooth. Bones can carry records of hardship long after the events themselves have vanished. They preserve evidence that an animal was injured, recovered, and continued living in a world where danger was a constant companion. This is one reason fossils offer more than anatomy alone. They do not merely show what an animal looked like. They can also preserve healed wounds, bite marks, infections, broken bones, and unusual patterns of bone growth. These traces transform skeletons from static objects into biographies written in mineralized tissue. Every healed injury represents a moment that could have ended differently. Every abnormal growth hints at challenges overcome during the animal's lifetime. One of the most important clues comes from healing itself. Bone is living tissue. When damaged, it responds. Fractures can mend. Injuries can stimulate new growth. Infections can alter surrounding structures. When paleontologists discover evidence of healing, they know the animal survived long enough for its body to react. The event was not immediately fatal. Time passed afterward. Days became weeks. Weeks became months, and the skeleton slowly recorded the process of recovery. This understanding changes how we imagine life in the late Cretaceous sea. Predation and combat were not always final events. Encounters could end with both animals surviving. A predator might escape with an injury. Prey might defend itself successfully. The fossil record captures some of these outcomes, revealing that survival often depended upon resilience as much as strength. The shark evidence discussed earlier becomes particularly meaningful when viewed through this lens. The significance is not merely that sharks existed alongside mosasaurs. It is that some mosasaurs carried the consequences of those encounters within their own bodies. Healed bite marks demonstrate that injuries became part of an individual's life history. The attack itself ended, but its signature remained. Bone continued growing around the damage, preserving a record of the encounter long after the wound closed. Sharks were not the only possible source of injury. The ocean contained many opportunities for harm. Large prey animals could defend themselves during capture attempts. A struggling turtle, fish, or marine reptile was not necessarily passive. Defensive movements, impacts, and resistance could leave lasting marks on a predator's skeleton. Even a successful hunt carried risks that accumulated over time. Conflict between mosasaurs may have contributed as well. In ecosystems containing multiple large predators, interactions between members of the same family are inevitable. Competition, territorial disputes, feeding conflicts, or accidental encounters all present possibilities. Direct evidence for specific behaviors remains limited, yet injuries attributable to encounters with other large animals remain entirely plausible within such environments. Accidents must also be considered. Life in the sea involves constant movement through a complex environment. Collisions, failed attacks, encounters with hard objects, and countless unpredictable events can leave traces in bone. Not every injury requires a dramatic explanation. Sometimes survival itself generates a record of wear and damage accumulated over many years. The scientific study of these ancient injuries is known as paleopathology, the investigation of disease, trauma, and abnormal conditions preserved in fossils. Through paleopathology, Researchers examine evidence of healed fractures, infections, deformities, and other changes that occurred during life. The field provides a rare opportunity to move beyond anatomy and glimpse the lived experiences of extinct animals. Viewed through this perspective, Mosasaurus becomes more than a collection of impressive adaptations. It becomes an individual creature navigating hazards, recovering from setbacks, and carrying physical reminders of past encounters. Dominance did not erase vulnerability. Strength did not prevent injury. The fossil record suggests a life shaped not only by hunting and growth, but also by survival. Yet even the largest skeleton bearing the marks of experience carries another quiet truth. Every scarred giant once existed at the opposite end of its story. A ruler with scars still had to begin life small. The largest predators often leave the strongest impression, yet every giant begins as something smaller. The immense skulls, powerful tails, and scarred bones that dominate museum displays represent only the final chapters of a much longer story. Before Mosasaurus became one of the major predators of the late Cretaceous Ocean, it passed through earlier stages of life when size offered fewer advantages and survival depended upon very different strategies. A young mosasaur would not have occupied the same ecological role as a fully grown adult. The difference was not merely a matter of scale. Growth changes how an animal interacts with its environment. It influences what can be hunted, what must be avoided, and where survival is most likely. A juvenile predator lives in a different world than the giant it may eventually become, even when both belong to the same species. Smaller bodies impose limits. Large prey that might later become accessible remain out of reach. Young mosasaurs likely relied upon food sources appropriate to their size and abilities. Smaller fish, invertebrates, and other manageable prey would have provided opportunities that matched the physical capabilities of an immature animal. Hunting large and dangerous prey would have carried risks that outweighed potential rewards. In nature, survival often depends upon choosing battles that can actually be won. Vulnerability also changes dramatically during early life. A fully grown Mosasaurus occupied an imposing position within the ecosystem, but juveniles lacked that protection. Predators that posed little threat to an adult could become significant dangers to younger individuals. Large fish, sharks, other marine reptiles, and perhaps even larger mosasaurs all represented potential hazards. The ocean contained many mouths, and a young predator could still appear on someone else's menu. These differences help explain why juvenile life stages matter so much when reconstructing extinct ecosystems. Every apex predator must survive a period when it is not yet an apex predator. The path to dominance passes through vulnerability first. An ecosystem capable of supporting large adults must also provide opportunities for younger individuals to grow and persist long enough to reach maturity. This raises interesting questions about habitat use during growth. In many modern marine ecosystems, younger animals often occupy environments that differ from those used by adults. Certain sharks utilize shallower regions during early life. Some marine reptiles rely upon habitats offering different balances of food availability and predator pressure. These patterns can reduce risk while providing access to suitable resources. For mosasaurs, however, caution is necessary. Fossils provide valuable clues, but they do not preserve every aspect of behavior. Evidence from particular localities has encouraged discussion about possible life stage differences in habitat use, and some researchers have explored whether younger individuals may have frequented different environments than large adults. Yet the details remain an active area of interpretation. The fossil record supports possibilities rather than complete certainty. Growth itself transformed the relationship between Mosasaurus and its world. Bones lengthened and strengthened over time. Teeth changed as replacement continued throughout life. Muscles increased in power. The consequences extended beyond anatomy. Size altered the menu available to the animal. Prey that once seemed unattainable became realistic targets. At the same time, the list of potential enemies gradually shrank. An animal large enough to challenge dangerous prey becomes difficult prey itself. Habitat use may have shifted as well. Larger bodies can travel greater distances, tolerate different conditions, and exploit resources unavailable to smaller individuals. The ocean experienced by a juvenile and the ocean experienced by an adult were therefore connected, yet distinct. Growth expanded opportunities while reducing certain risks, gradually moving the animal toward the ecological role that later fossils reveal so clearly. Seen through this lens, Mosasaurus was never a static creature. It changed continuously throughout life, adapting to new challenges as its body transformed. Each stage brought different pressures, different possibilities, and different relationships with the surrounding ecosystem. As Mosasaurus grew, its senses became the bridge between body and prey. The ocean rarely presents information all at once. Distance softens outlines, suspended particles blur details, and shifting currents carry signals in directions that are not always predictable. For a predator searching for prey beneath the surface, survival depends upon interpreting a world where much remains hidden. Before Mosasaurus could capture anything, it first had to detect it. Hunting underwater presents a sensory challenge very different from hunting on land. Light behaves differently once it enters the sea. With increasing depth, brightness fades, and colors gradually disappear. Water clarity varies as well. Tiny particles suspended throughout the water column can reduce visibility even in relatively shallow environments. A predator relying entirely on sight would quickly encounter limitations, particularly in a vast marine ecosystem where conditions changed from place to place and moment to moment. Yet vision likely remained important. Predators benefit from accurate judgment of distance, timing, and movement. A successful strike often depends upon knowing precisely where a target is and where it will be a moment later. The eyes of Mosasaurus, therefore, represented more than simple windows to the surrounding world. They formed part of a larger system that allowed the animal to navigate, track motion, and coordinate the rapid decisions required during hunting. In many encounters, sight may have provided the final confirmation needed before an attack. A distant shape emerging from murky water, a subtle shift in direction, or the outline of prey against changing light conditions could all become valuable information. Even when visibility was imperfect, visual cues likely contributed to the predator's understanding of its surroundings. Smell offered another source of information. Water carries dissolved chemical signals through currents that move across considerable distances. Modern marine animals often use such cues to locate food, recognize habitats, or detect biological activity nearby. While the exact capabilities of Mosasaurus cannot be measured directly, it is reasonable to suggest that chemical information played some role in how it interacted with its environment. The scent of injured prey, decomposing carrion, or concentrated biological activity may have provided clues about opportunities hidden beyond immediate sight. Unlike light, chemical signals do not require direct visual contact. A current can transport information through regions where visibility is limited. In this way, smell expands awareness, Beyond what the eyes alone can provide, the ocean becomes not merely a place to see, but a place to interpret through multiple streams of sensory input arriving simultaneously. Movement itself also leaves traces. Every swimming animal disturbs the water around it. These disturbances spread outward as pressure changes and subtle waves. Many aquatic animals possess ways of detecting nearby movement through specialized sensory systems adapted to their particular biology. For Mosasaurus, caution is necessary because the fossil record does not preserve soft tissues capable of revealing every sensory structure. No evidence allows a precise reconstruction of exactly how it detected water movement. Nevertheless, the principle remains important. The ocean is constantly communicating through motion. Nearby animals generate disturbances, currents shift, objects displace water as they travel. A predator capable of interpreting even part of this information gains a significant advantage. The ability to recognize movement before direct contact increases the likelihood of locating prey and avoiding hazards. Taken together, these sensory pathways reveal a broader truth. Mosasaurus was not simply a collection of teeth and jaws moving through the sea. Predation begins with information. Before a bite can occur, a target must be found. Before pursuit begins, the environment must be interpreted. The body provides power, but information determines where that power is directed. Seen through this perspective, the predator becomes something quieter than its reputation suggests. It drifts through a world of shifting signals, gathering fragments of information from light, chemistry, and movement. A shadow reading the water before the water reveals it. But even the best hunter had one ancient limitation. A journey through water can create the illusion of complete belonging. A body moves with confidence beneath the surface, disappears into depth, and spends its life surrounded by the sea. Yet, even the most specialized marine reptiles carried a reminder of a much older inheritance. However perfectly adapted Mosasaurus became to ocean life, it never escaped one fundamental condition of its ancestry. It breathed air. This simple fact shaped every day of its existence. Mosasaurus was a reptile, not a fish. It possessed lungs rather than gills and depended upon atmospheric oxygen to sustain its activities. The ocean may have been its home, but the surface remained a necessity. No matter how successful the hunt or how favorable the conditions below, there always came a moment when the animal had to return upward. Every dive, therefore, possessed natural boundaries. It began with air and ended with air. Between those points stretched the period during which the predator could travel, search, investigate, and feed. The exact duration of those dives remains uncertain, and the fossil record does not allow precise measurements of how long Mosasaurus could remain submerged. What can be said with confidence is that oxygen represented a finite resource. Every movement beneath the surface gradually drew upon a reserve that eventually required replenishment. This limitation influenced behavior in subtle but important ways. Hunting was not simply a matter of locating prey, it also involved managing energy and oxygen efficiently. A failed pursuit carried more than the cost of lost effort. It consumed part of the limited time available before surfacing became necessary. The economics of underwater life favored efficiency, reinforcing the value of controlled movement and carefully chosen opportunities. Returning to the surface introduced challenges of its own. An animal ascending through the water column could not remain completely hidden forever. Surfacing exposed at least part of the body to the open air, potentially revealing its presence to other creatures occupying the same environment. The sea concealed much, but breathing required a brief connection with the world above. In this way, even a dominant predator remained subject to rhythms imposed by physiology rather than preference. The pattern likely repeated throughout the animal's life: surface, breathe, descend, search, strike, return. The sequence formed a cycle linking every aspect of marine existence. Hunting, travel, and exploration all unfolded within that framework. The ocean may have appeared limitless, yet the need for air quietly organized the movements of one of its most formidable inhabitants. Modern marine reptiles provide useful reminders of this principle. Sea turtles spend much of their lives in aquatic environments, yet they still rise to breathe. Marine snakes, despite their extraordinary adaptations to life in the water, remain dependent upon atmospheric oxygen as well. These animals are not direct models for Mosasaurus, whose anatomy and ecology differed substantially, but they illustrate a broader truth. Returning to the surface is not a sign of incomplete adaptation. It is simply the consequence of carrying reptilian lungs into a marine world. Viewed from this perspective, Mosasaurus becomes more than a predator moving through ancient seas. It becomes an animal living between two realms. Most of its life unfolded underwater, yet its survival depended upon a resource located above the waves. Every successful hunt, every migration, every encounter with prey or rival ultimately remained connected to the act of breathing. There is something revealing in that dependence. The immense jaws, powerful body, and sensory adaptations discussed throughout this journey did not free the animal from biological constraints. They existed alongside them. The ruler of a dangerous ocean still needed the same invisible substance required by countless other creatures. However distant it traveled beneath the surface, it remained tethered to the sky. That connection mattered beyond the life of any single individual. The surface was not merely a boundary between water and air. It linked marine regions across continents, currents, and climates. And that surface connected oceans across the late Cretaceous world. Fossils have a way of collapsing distance. A jaw discovered in one country can belong to an animal that once crossed waters stretching far beyond modern borders. A tooth lifted from desert rock may come from a creature that lived in a vanished sea. By the time Mosasaurus appears in the geological record, its story is no longer confined to a single coastline or basin. It unfolds across a planet whose geography looked very different from the one we know today. The name Mosasaurus carries a connection to Europe, particularly the region surrounding Maastricht, where some of the earliest and most famous remains were discovered. The animal became closely associated with deposits from this part of the world, and the final stage of the Cretaceous itself would eventually take the name Maastrichtian from the same region. Layers of ancient marine rock preserved fragments of a predator that once moved through warm seas, covering portions of Europe during the closing chapters of the dinosaur age. Yet Europe represents only one part of a much larger picture. Fossils assigned to Mosasaurus have also been recovered from North America, where broad marine environments once occupied landscapes now far from any ocean shore. Skeletons, skull fragments, vertebrae, and isolated teeth reveal that these reptiles were present across extensive marine systems. The same animal that left traces near European waters also belonged to ecosystems stretching across distant regions of the ancient world. Far to the south, North Africa preserves another important chapter of the story. Morocco, in particular, has produced abundant marine fossils from rocks dating to the latest part of the Cretaceous. Recent published work has reported Mosasaurus hoffmannii from maastrichtian phosphate deposits in this region, adding further evidence that members of this genus occupied a broad geographic range. These discoveries help demonstrate that Mosasaurus was not restricted to a narrow corner of the planet. It participated in marine ecosystems that extended across multiple continents. Additional late Cretaceous marine deposits from various regions have yielded fossils that have been assigned to Mosasaurus or closely related forms. Although particular species identifications can sometimes remain subjects of scientific discussion, fossil classification is rarely static. New specimens, improved comparisons, and revised analyses occasionally reshape how paleontologists interpret relationships between discoveries separated by vast distances and spans of time. Geography matters because it reveals scale. A predator confined to a single location tells one kind of story. A predator found across multiple marine regions tells another. Mosasaurus was not a local curiosity inhabiting an isolated environment. It belonged to interconnected marine systems linked by ancient oceans and shifting coastlines. Its presence across distant regions reflects the enormous reach of late Cretaceous seas. Those seas existed on a world whose map would appear unfamiliar to modern eyes. Continents occupied different positions. Coastlines followed different paths. Areas that are now farmland, prairie, desert, or inland plateau once lay beneath shallow marine waters. The boundaries separating land and sea shifted repeatedly as global sea levels rose and fell over immense stretches of time. Evidence of those vanished waters survives in the rocks themselves. Chalk deposits preserve traces of ancient marine environments. Phosphate beds record ecosystems rich in biological activity. Layers of marine sediment accumulate grain by grain before hardening into stone. In many places, rocks exposed hundreds of kilometers from modern shorelines originated on ancient seafloors. What appears today as dry land can contain the remains of creatures that never touched land at all. Each fossil locality therefore serves as a small window into a larger network of oceans that once connected distant habitats. The bones and teeth found across Europe, North America, North Africa, and other regions are pieces of a planetary puzzle, revealing an animal adapted not merely to one sea, but to a changing world of interconnected marine environments. The story now reaches its peak in the final age of the Cretaceous. The end of an age rarely announces itself. Oceans can remain full of life. Coastlines can continue shifting beneath familiar tides, and predators can still patrol waters that seem as stable as they have for millions of years. Near the close of the Cretaceous, the world retained much of its vitality. The seas remained crowded, productive, and rich with ancient lineages that had flourished for immense spans of time. Nothing in the appearance of the ecosystem suggested how close it stood to a profound turning point. This chapter of Earth history is known as the Maastrichtian, the final stage of the Cretaceous period. It occupied the last several million years before the end Cretaceous extinction and serves as the closing act of a world dominated by familiar prehistoric giants. The name itself echoes the same European region that helped bring Mosasaurus to scientific attention, linking the animal closely to the final interval of the age in which it thrived. Because of this timing, Mosasaurus has become one of the most iconic marine reptiles of the late Cretaceous. It appears not at the beginning of the story, but near its conclusion. When paleontologists reconstruct the oceans of the Maastrichtian, Mosasaurus often emerges as one of the defining predators of that ancient seascape, sharing the water with other animals whose histories stretched deep into the past. The oceans themselves remained remarkably productive. Warm conditions persisted across many regions of the planet. Marine food webs continued transferring energy from microscopic organisms to larger and larger consumers. Fish moved through open waters in vast numbers. Ammonites still drifted through the sea. Marine reptiles remained important predators. Sharks occupied multiple ecological roles. Life flowed through the system with a complexity built over millions of years. From a distance, the ecosystem appeared strong. Large predators still hunted. Ancient lineages still occupied familiar habitats. The relationships connecting prey, predator, scavenger, and competitor remained active. The ocean retained the appearance of continuity, a living network that had survived countless environmental fluctuations before. Yet there is an important lesson hidden within the history of ecosystems. Strength and permanence are not the same thing. A system can appear powerful while remaining vulnerable to forces not yet visible within the daily lives of its inhabitants. Forests may seem timeless before fire. Coral reefs may flourish before disruption. Oceans can support extraordinary diversity, even as conditions begin shifting beyond familiar boundaries. The Maastrichtian seas offer a similar perspective. Nothing suggests that Mosasaurus, ammonites, or other marine animals possessed awareness of what lay ahead. They continued feeding, reproducing, migrating, and competing according to the pressures that had shaped their existence for generations. The ocean remained a functioning world, not a landscape in visible decline. Its future collapse existed outside the perception of the creatures living within it. This contrast gives the final Cretaceous ocean a distinctive atmosphere. It was not a fading shadow of former greatness. It was still a thriving ecosystem. The predators remained formidable. The prey remained abundant. Ancient evolutionary experiments continued occupying niches refined across immense spans of time. Life persisted with remarkable confidence right up to the edge of transformation. The fossil record reveals the scale of what would eventually be lost. The University of California Museum of Paleontology notes that mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, pterosaurs, non-avian dinosaurs, and ammonites were among the groups that disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous. These were not isolated casualties. Entire branches of Earth's history came to an end within a relatively brief geological interval. For now, however, the ocean still belonged to them. Mosasaurus continued moving through productive waters, filled with opportunity and competition. The world remained recognizable to the creatures inhabiting it. The food webs still functioned. The predators still hunted. The great marine reptiles still occupied their place near the top of the ecosystem. Before the fall, we need to answer why Mosasaurus ruled at all. The word ruler often creates a misleading image. It suggests a single trait so overwhelming that all competition simply fades away. Nature rarely works that way. Dominance emerges from combinations rather than absolutes, from anatomy meeting circumstance at precisely the right moment. When paleontologists describe Mosasaurus as one of the dominant predators of the late Cretaceous ocean, they are not pointing to a single secret advantage. They are describing a convergence of traits that allowed one lineage to thrive within an ecosystem prepared to reward those traits. Size formed an important part of that equation. Large animals occupy a different ecological position than small ones. A predator measuring several meters in length can access prey unavailable to lesser hunters. It can challenge animals that would be dangerous opponents for smaller competitors. As Mosasaurus reached mature size, it gained access to opportunities spread across multiple levels of the food web. Large fish, marine reptiles, cephalopods, carrion, and other resources became available within its range of possibilities. Size also changes how risk is distributed. Not every threat disappears, as the fossil record makes clear, but many potential dangers become less significant. Predators capable of attacking a juvenile may hesitate before confronting a fully grown adult. A large body becomes both a tool for hunting and a form of protection. The energy required to challenge such an animal often outweighs the potential reward. Yet, size alone does not explain success. The ocean has hosted many large animals that never achieved comparable ecological influence. Mosasaurus combined scale with an anatomy specialized for capturing and controlling prey. The skull concentrated power at the front of the body. Strong jaws delivered force efficiently. Teeth evolved for gripping, holding, and processing a wide variety of marine prey. Together, these features created a predator capable of exploiting opportunities across different ecological settings. Diet flexibility may have been one of the most important advantages of all. Specialists often thrive when conditions remain stable, but broader feeding options can provide resilience. Fossil evidence indicates that mosasaurs consumed multiple kinds of prey, and different members of the group occupied different ecological roles. Within that framework, Mosasaurus appears to have benefited from access to a diverse menu. A predator capable of feeding across several categories of prey is less dependent upon any single resource. Movement contributed as well. Earlier sections explored the mechanics of swimming, the role of the tail, and the advantages of efficient underwater travel. Those adaptations mattered because they allowed Mosasaurus to operate effectively across large marine environments. Reaching prey is just as important as detecting it. A predator unable to move efficiently cannot fully exploit the resources available around it. Geography amplified all of these advantages. The late Cretaceous world offered extensive, shallow seas, productive coastal environments, and broad marine connections linking distant regions. Such conditions created opportunities for successful marine predators to expand their range. Mosasaurus existed within oceans that stretched across enormous areas, providing access to habitats capable of supporting large populations and diverse prey communities. Timing played a role as well. Evolution does not occur on an empty stage. Lineages rise within ecosystems shaped by the successes and failures of earlier groups. By the late Cretaceous, marine ecosystems had already witnessed the appearance and decline of many reptilian forms. As ecological roles shifted through time, mosasaurs expanded into opportunities available within changing marine communities. Their success reflects not only their own adaptations but also the broader evolutionary landscape into which they emerged. Seen together, these factors create a clearer explanation than any simple myth of invincibility. Mosasaurus was not dominant because it possessed a magical trait or because it stood outside the ordinary rules of ecology. It succeeded because anatomy matched opportunity. Large size, effective feeding structures, versatile diet, capable movement, favorable geography, and fortunate timing aligned within one lineage at one particular moment in Earth's history. That combination allowed Mosasaurus to flourish across some of the most productive oceans the planet had ever known. Yet beneath that success lay a quieter truth. Predators depend upon the systems supporting them, no matter how formidable they become. But the same world that made Mosasaurus possible was fragile in ways no jaw could solve. Far below the level where predators meet their prey, another story unfolds. It is a quieter story, easy to overlook when attention is fixed on jaws, teeth, and pursuit. Yet it is the foundation beneath every hunt. The largest marine reptile, the swiftest fish, and the most successful hunter all depended upon processes so small that they were invisible to the animals living above them. The power of Mosasaurus rested upon a structure it could never see. Apex predators occupy the highest levels of food webs, but they do not exist independently from the layers beneath them. Every bite taken by a large predator ultimately traces back through a chain of relationships extending downward through the ecosystem. The top of the pyramid can appear dominant, yet its existence depends entirely upon everything supporting it from below. At the foundation stood plankton, tiny drifting organisms suspended within the water. Some captured energy from sunlight, transforming it into biological material that became available to the rest of the marine world. Others fed upon these microscopic producers. Together, they formed the first steps of a vast transfer of energy moving through the ocean. Small organisms consumed plankton. Small fish consumed those organisms. Larger fish fed upon smaller fish. Marine reptiles hunted fish and other reptiles. Predators occupied increasingly powerful positions as energy moved upward through the system. By the time that energy reached an animal such as Mosasaurus, it had already passed through countless living bodies and ecological relationships. This arrangement may seem indirect, yet it governs every marine ecosystem. A giant predator cannot create energy for itself. It can only access energy that already exists within the food web. The abundance of prey available to large hunters therefore depends upon the health and productivity of the levels beneath them. Remove enough support from the base, and the consequences eventually reach the top. The late Cretaceous oceans appear to have been exceptionally productive environments. Nutrients circulated through marine systems, supporting plankton populations across broad regions. Sunlight fueled biological activity near the surface. Fish communities flourished. Predators benefited from the abundance created by these conditions. Productivity generated opportunity, and opportunity allowed large marine reptiles to thrive. Researchers studying mosasaur evolution have argued that this success was connected to broader patterns of marine productivity during the late Cretaceous. Sea level changes influenced the distribution of shallow marine habitats. Climate affected ocean conditions across different regions. Water layering influenced how nutrients moved through marine systems. Nutrient delivery itself shaped the productivity supporting the food web. These factors worked together, creating environments capable of sustaining large predators over long periods of time. Seen from this perspective, Mosasaurus was not merely an isolated evolutionary success. It was part of a much larger ecological story. Its rise depended upon conditions extending far beyond its own anatomy. Strong jaws and effective swimming mattered, but those traits alone could not create prey. The environment supplied the biological wealth that made large predators possible. This dependence reveals a subtle vulnerability hidden beneath apparent strength. Apex predators often seem powerful because they occupy the highest ecological positions. Yet, they are also among the most dependent animals in the system. Their survival requires the continued functioning of every level beneath them. If disruptions spread through lower portions of the food web, predators cannot simply choose independence. They remain tied to the same ecological foundation as every other creature. A decline in plankton eventually influences fish populations. Changes affecting fish influence larger consumers. The effects travel upward through the network, sometimes slowly, sometimes rapidly, but always persistently. The higher an animal stands within the food web, the more relationships support its existence. For millions of years, the late Cretaceous oceans maintained that balance well enough to sustain some of the largest marine predators Earth had ever known. The structure appeared stable, productive, and resilient. Yet, stability does not guarantee permanence. Beneath the dominance of Mosasaurus lay an ecological framework that could support greatness only while its foundations remained intact. Then came the ending that did not care what ruled the sea. For millions of years, the oceans maintained the relationships that sustained Mosasaurus and countless other forms of life. Energy flowed through food webs, predators found prey, and ecosystems adjusted to ordinary environmental changes as they always had. Then, within a comparatively brief interval of geological time, the stability supporting that world began to fail. The event that followed would become one of the most significant biological turning points in Earth's history. Approximately 66 million years ago, the Cretaceous Period came to an end. This boundary is associated with the Chicxulub impact, the collision of a large asteroid with Earth in what is now the Yucatan region. The impact itself was only part of a broader sequence of environmental disruptions, yet it remains the most widely recognized trigger connected to the extinction event that followed. The consequences extended far beyond the location of the collision. Material thrown into the atmosphere spread across the planet. Dust, soot, and other particles altered conditions on a global scale. The exact details remain areas of ongoing scientific study, but the overall picture is clear. Earth experienced environmental changes severe enough to disrupt ecosystems on land and in the sea. The losses were immense. Non-avian dinosaurs disappeared. Pterosaurs vanished from the skies. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs disappeared from the oceans. Ammonites, which had survived through vast stretches of geological time, reached the end of their history. Many planktonic organisms suffered severe declines as well. According to the University of California Museum of Paleontology, Mosasaurs and other major marine reptile lineages were among the groups lost by the end of the Cretaceous. For an animal such as Mosasaurus, strength offered little protection against changes occurring at the scale of entire ecosystems. The predator had evolved to hunt prey, compete with rivals, and navigate the challenges of marine life. None of those adaptations were designed to address the collapse of the environmental framework supporting the food web itself. Darkness likely played an important role in the chain of events. When large quantities of material enter the atmosphere, sunlight reaching the surface can be reduced. Marine productivity depends heavily upon sunlight because plankton near the surface form the foundation of ocean food webs. If light declines significantly, the effects can spread through the ecosystem from the bottom upward. Climate disruption added further pressure. Changes in temperature, circulation patterns, and environmental conditions can alter the distribution of organisms across entire regions. Species adapted to particular ecological circumstances may suddenly find those circumstances disappearing. Survival becomes increasingly difficult when habitats transform faster than populations can adjust. Food web disturbance may have been even more important for large predators. Mosasaurus depended upon abundant prey. Its prey depended upon their own food sources. Those food sources depended upon organisms lower in the chain. If enough levels experience disruption simultaneously, the consequences move upward through the system. The predator at the top cannot separate itself from the foundation beneath it. Marine productivity appears to have suffered significant stress during this interval. As productivity declined, the biological wealth that had supported late Cretaceous oceans weakened. Fewer resources at the base eventually meant fewer resources at every higher level. Large predators require substantial energy. When energy becomes scarce throughout the ecosystem, large animals often face particular challenges. This is one of the most important lessons preserved by the extinction of Mosasaurus. Apex predators can appear powerful because they occupy dominant ecological positions. Within stable systems, their adaptations allow them to flourish, yet their success remains dependent upon the continued operation of those systems. When the environment itself begins to fail, even the most formidable predator cannot rely on strength alone. Mosasaurus did not disappear because another hunter replaced it. It did not lose a contest against a rival species. Instead, the world supporting its existence changed beyond recovery. The same oceans that had allowed its rise could no longer sustain the conditions that made such animals possible. After Mosasaurus vanished, the ocean had to rebuild without it. Long after the last Mosasaurus disappeared, the oceans remained. Waves continued crossing shorelines. Currents still carried nutrients through vast marine basins. Sunlight still filtered into surface waters where countless small organisms drifted. From a distance, the planet may have appeared unchanged. Yet beneath those familiar patterns, entire ecological structures had been erased, leaving spaces where once there had been living participants in an ancient marine world. Extinction does more than remove species. It creates ecological vacancies, openings within ecosystems where old relationships vanish and new ones gradually emerge. When Mosasaurus disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous, the ocean did not simply produce another animal to take its place. The role had been shaped by a particular combination of anatomy, environment, prey availability, and evolutionary history. Once those conditions vanished, the role vanished with them. The earliest oceans after the extinction were not thriving replacements for what had existed before. They were recovering systems. Food webs had been disrupted. Many lineages had disappeared. Survivors occupied a world that had become quieter in some ways and less crowded in others. Recovery would take immense spans of time, measured not in generations, but in millions of years. Among the survivors were sharks. They had shared the late Cretaceous seas with mosasaurs and endured the extinction event that ended so many other lineages. In the ages that followed, sharks continued evolving, diversifying, and spreading through marine ecosystems. Some became swift hunters of open water. Others specialized in coastal habitats or deep environments. Their story did not replace the story of Mosasaurus, yet it became one of the major threads woven through the oceans that followed. Bony fish also continued their long expansion. Many groups survived the crisis and diversified afterward, filling ecological opportunities left behind by extinction. The moving layers of marine life that once fed predators of the Cretaceous continued to evolve into new forms. Schools crossed ancient seas, predators pursued them, and ecosystems slowly rebuilt themselves through countless interactions repeated over geological time. Much later, another remarkable transition would occur. Mammals, whose distant ancestors had lived entirely on land, would return to marine environments. Over millions of years, some evolved into fully aquatic forms. These future marine mammals would become important predators, travelers, and ecosystem engineers. Yet they belonged to a very different chapter of Earth's history. They were not replacements for mosasaurs. They represented a separate evolutionary journey shaped by different ancestors and different oceans. What makes Mosasaurus distinctive is that no living marine reptile occupies exactly the same ecological position today. Sea turtles still travel through the world's oceans, ancient in appearance and deeply successful in their own ways. Marine iguanas forage in coastal waters along isolated shores. Sea snakes glide through warm seas with elegant efficiency, yet none combine the immense size, predatory specialization, and broad oceanic dominance associated with large mosasaurs. The absence becomes more noticeable when viewed against the backdrop of the modern ocean. The ecological role once occupied by giant marine reptiles remains part of Earth's history rather than its present. The oceans adapted, as ecosystems always do, but adaptation did not recreate the same animals. Evolution continued forward instead of retracing its steps. In that sense, the sea remembers the role, but not the animal. The currents that once carried Mosasaurus still move across the planet. Marine food webs still connect predators and prey through complex chains of energy. Life still rises, diversifies, and changes. Yet the long reptilian hunter that once crossed the late Cretaceous seas exists only in traces left behind within stone. What remains are fossils, and fossils are quieter than monsters. Evidence rarely arrives as a complete story. More often it appears as scattered pieces separated by distance, time, and chance, waiting patiently within layers of ancient rock. A single tooth may emerge from pale sediment. A vertebra may surface from a quarry cut into an old seabed. A fragment of jaw may rest unnoticed for decades before being recognized for what it is. From such fragments, an animal that vanished tens of millions of years ago slowly returns to view. The fossil record of Mosasaurus is built from many kinds of evidence rather than a single perfect specimen. Skulls have played an especially important role in shaping scientific understanding, but they are only part of the picture. Teeth, vertebrae, jaw fragments, isolated bones, and partial skeletons all contribute information. Beyond the animal itself, paleontologists also examine bite marks left on bone, damage preserved in shells, rare stomach contents, and the sediments that surrounded fossil remains when they were buried. Each discovery adds another small piece to a much larger reconstruction. Sediment matters because fossils never exist in isolation. The rock surrounding a specimen can reveal clues about ancient water depth, environmental conditions, and the broader ecosystem in which the animal lived. A fossil collected from marine chalk may tell a slightly different story than one recovered from phosphate deposits or other seafloor sediments. The stone becomes part of the evidence, preserving traces of a vanished world alongside the bones of its inhabitants. Because the evidence is incomplete, reconstructions change. New fossils sometimes reveal anatomical details that were previously unknown. Better comparisons with related species can refine older interpretations. Advances in imaging technology allow scientists to examine internal structures without damaging valuable specimens. Taxonomy also evolves as researchers revisit old material and reconsider how species should be classified. What once appeared straightforward may become more complicated under closer examination. This process can be seen clearly in the continuing study of Mosasaurus itself. The redescription published in the year 2017 highlighted how scientifically challenging the genus had become. For many years, the name had accumulated a complicated history, with different fossils and species assignments contributing to uncertainty. Careful revision helped clarify some of those issues, yet it also demonstrated an important reality of paleontology. Even one of the most famous marine reptiles ever discovered can remain difficult to define with complete confidence. The same caution appears in discussions of body size. Earlier generations sometimes produced extremely large estimates based on limited material and broader assumptions. Modern studies often favor more restrained interpretations supported by better comparisons and improved methods. The goal is not to make the animal larger or smaller. The goal is to make it more accurate. This is how paleontology advances. It is not a process of inventing dramatic stories and searching for evidence afterward. Instead, evidence comes first. Fossils provide clues, and scientists build explanations that fit those clues as closely as possible. When stronger evidence appears, the explanations change with it. Certainty is rarely absolute, but neither is the process arbitrary. Each conclusion rests upon observations that can be tested, challenged, and refined. In that sense, the reconstruction of Mosasaurus resembles the reconstruction of its ocean: a tooth preserved in chalk, a jaw resting within stone, bite marks etched into ancient bone, shell damage preserved across geological ages. Separate fragments gathered from different places gradually combine into something larger than any individual discovery. The result is not merely an animal. It is an attempt to recover an entire world from incomplete remains. And that is why Mosasaurus still feels larger than its bones. Long after the bones of Mosasaurus settled into stone, long after the seas that carried it had changed shape and the continents had drifted toward their modern positions, the animal remained present in another place. It endured in imagination. Few extinct creatures occupy the human mind with such persistence, and the reason reaches beyond size alone. Mosasaurus stands at the meeting point of three ideas that have always held a peculiar power over us: the ocean, predation, and deep time. The ocean has a different relationship with mystery than the land. Mountains can be climbed, forests can be crossed, deserts can be surveyed from horizon to horizon. Water conceals. A calm surface reveals very little of what exists beneath it. Distance becomes difficult to judge. Shapes lose clarity. Depth absorbs light. Even in the modern world, vast portions of the ocean remain unseen by most people. Predators become stranger in such an environment. On land, movement can often be followed with the eye. Position and direction are easier to understand. In the water, those certainties weaken. An animal may be nearby without being visible. A body may appear larger or smaller than it truly is. Motion can emerge from below, from behind, or from the darkness of deeper water. The ocean changes perception itself. Because of that, marine predators often carry a particular weight within the imagination. Their world is hidden, and hidden worlds naturally invite curiosity. Mosasaurus occupies that hidden realm on a scale large enough to command attention, but real enough to remain believable. It does not belong to folklore. It is not a creature inherited from myth. It is not a dragon invented by storytellers or a monster shaped by legend. Its existence is recorded in fossils, in teeth preserved within stone, in skulls recovered from ancient sediments, and in traces left behind by a vanished ecosystem. That reality matters. The fascination survives because the animal genuinely lived. At some point in the distant past, a living Mosasaurus moved through warm Cretaceous seas beneath skies that no human would ever see. It hunted real prey. It breathed real air. It occupied a world that existed independently of our imagination. The fossils do not create the animal. They reveal that it was already there. There is also the matter of time. Human history occupies only a tiny fraction of Earth's story. Civilizations rise and fall within intervals that geology scarcely notices. Languages emerge, change, and disappear. Entire cultures pass across the planet in spans far shorter than the existence of many fossil lineages. Mosasaurus belongs to a chapter of Earth, so distant that it can feel almost dreamlike, yet that chapter was every bit as real as the present. The late Cretaceous world was not waiting for humanity. Its oceans circulated, its ecosystems functioned, and its predators hunted millions of years before the first human ancestor appeared. Mosasaurus lived, thrived, and vanished within a history that unfolded entirely without us. Perhaps part of its enduring power comes from that perspective. It reminds us that Earth possesses a story far larger than any single species. As the evidence accumulates through generations of discovery, the animal becomes both clearer and more mysterious. We learn more about its anatomy, its ecology, and its place within ancient marine systems. Yet the distance between its world and ours remains immense. That distance gives the fossils a quiet gravity. The final meaning of Mosasaurus is not only that it ruled, but that even rulers pass. The story settles at the edge of the water, not at the moment of discovery, nor at the height of the hunt, but in the long stillness that follows. The fossils have carried us through ancient seas, through vanished ecosystems, and across spans of time so immense that entire mountain ranges have risen and worn away within them. What remains is not a single predator, but the world that allowed such a predator to exist. Mosasaurus did not appear fully formed within the ocean. Its story began far earlier, within a lineage connected to land. Deep in the history of reptiles, ancestors moved across shorelines and terrestrial landscapes beneath unfamiliar skies. Through evolution, some branches of that lineage entered the water and began a transformation measured not in years or centuries, but across vast stretches of geological time. Limbs changed their purpose. Bodies adapted to movement through dense fluid. Hunting strategies shifted. Generation after generation carried the transition forward until animals emerged that belonged to the sea as completely as their ancestors had once belonged to the land. The oceans they entered were unusually favorable places for large marine life. High sea levels spread shallow waters across broad regions of the planet. Warm conditions supported productive ecosystems rich with energy. Nutrients fed plankton. Plankton supported small animals. Small animals fed fish and cephalopods. Larger predators fed upon them in turn. Across that layered structure, energy moved upward through countless lives until it reached the largest hunters. Within those seas, Mosasaurus rose to prominence. Yet prominence never meant solitude. The waters contained sharks, giant predatory fish, plesiosaurs, diving birds, ammonites, turtles, and other mosasaurs. Every level of the ecosystem contained danger. Prey could fight back. Rivals competed for resources. Injury remained a constant possibility. Survival depended not upon a single advantage, but upon a combination of anatomy, behavior, opportunity, and circumstance. That complexity helps explain the title that has followed Mosasaurus into the modern imagination. It ruled Earth's deadliest sea, not because the sea belonged entirely to it. No ocean has ever belonged entirely to any one species. The title carries meaning because the environment itself was so demanding. To dominate such a place required size, powerful jaws, effective movement, broad dietary opportunities, and an ecological setting capable of supporting large predators. Mosasaurus succeeded because it matched the world around it with remarkable precision. Yet the same ecosystem that sustained it also imposed limits. Apex predators depend upon everything beneath them. When environmental disruption spread across the planet at the end of the Cretaceous, strength alone could not preserve the system. Food webs faltered, productivity declined, entire lineages disappeared. Mosasaurus vanished along with many of the organisms that had shared its world. Perhaps that is one of the quiet lessons hidden within the fossil record. The ocean has never been one thing. Across time, it has served many roles at once. It has been nursery and battlefield, migration route and hunting ground, refuge and graveyard. It has carried life across continents and preserved the remains of that life within layers of stone. It has hidden histories while simultaneously recording them. Deep time continues its patient work. Seas rise and retreat. Continents drift into new arrangements. Predators emerge, flourish, and disappear. Ecosystems form, transform, and vanish. Through all of it, the rocks endure as a record written slowly across the surface of the earth. Mosasaurus is gone, but the water that shaped it is still here. The same planet still turns beneath the same sky. Oceans still cover much of its surface, vast enough to conceal mysteries, ancient enough to hold memory. Somewhere within their depths lingers the faint echo of worlds that no longer exist, carried forward by waters that have never truly stopped moving.